I let him talk. He had no idea who he was talking to. My name is Walter Drummond. I turned 63 last March, and I have the kind of hands that make people assume things about me: thick fingers, rough palms, a scar across my left knuckle from a fence wire that caught me wrong back in 1987. I've never tried to hide them. My late wife Margaret used to hold those hands at the dinner table and say they were the most honest things about me. She wasn't wrong. It was a Saturday in late September when my daughter Claire called to tell me the wedding date had been set. October the following year. She was so happy her voice cracked twice before she finished the sentence, and I sat there on the back porch of my property outside Nanton, Alberta, looking out at the canola fields, gone gold in the evening light, and I felt something close to complete. Claire had been with Ryan for 4 years by then. Good man, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of young man who shakes your hand and looks you in the eye. I liked him from the first time he came to the farm. What I knew less about was his father. His name was Gordon Ashford. I'd heard pieces over the years that he ran a commercial real estate firm out of Calgary, that he had money, that he was the kind of man who measured people quickly and rarely revised his assessments. Claire had mentioned once, carefully, that Gordon could be a lot. She said it the way people say things when they want to warn you without alarming you. I didn't think much of it. I've dealt with difficult men my whole life. I grew up the youngest of 4 boys on a grain farm outside Lethbridge. My father never had more than $60 in his wallet at any one time, and he worked himself to the bone for every one of those dollars. I understood early what it meant to earn something. I also understood what it meant to be looked through by men who thought a person's worth could be read from their truck or their boots or the calluses on their hands. I had my share of that when I was young. Less now. Mostly because people stop looking at you that way once they find out who you are. But on that particular Saturday evening in September, Gordon Ashford had no idea who I was, and I had no particular need to tell him. The engagement dinner was held at a restaurant in Calgary, a nice place on 17th Avenue, the kind with low lighting and a wine list that comes in a leather folder. Claire had made the reservation. She was excited about both families meeting properly for the first time. Ryan's mother Diane had called me the week before to introduce herself. She was warm, easy to talk to, asked me about the farm, and listened when I answered. I thought, if Gordon was anything like Diane, the evening would be fine. He was not like Diane. I drove up from Nanton that afternoon. I wore what I always wear to things like that: clean, dark trousers, a button shirt, my good belt. I'd gotten a haircut the week before because Claire had asked me to. I am not a man who thinks much about appearances, but I think about my daughter, and she mattered enough to me to sit in a barber's chair for 40 minutes on a Tuesday. I arrived a few minutes early and found Ryan and Claire already there, along with Diane. Gordon arrived 7 minutes later. I know because I was watching the door. He came in like a man who owns the room he walks into, or at least like a man who needs people to believe he does. Expensive suit. That particular kind of confidence that has been reinforced over decades by people who were paid to agree with him. He was tall, silver-haired, probably 60 or so, maybe a year younger than me. He shook my hand firmly, which I respected, but his eyes were already moving past me before the handshake was finished. We sat down. The conversation started the way those conversations do, politely, carefully. Claire told a story about how she and Ryan had met. Diane laughed in the right places. I ordered a water and watched Gordon scan the table the way a man does when he's deciding the social architecture of a room. It wasn't long before he began talking about his firm, not in a boastful way, exactly more in the way of a man who assumes everyone at the table wants to know. 40 million square feet of commercial space under management, offices in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. A new development in Kelowna he was very excited about. I listened. I asked a question or two. Genuine questions, because I'm genuinely interested in how people build things. He asked me, at some point, what I did. I told him I had a farm outside Nanton. He nodded the way people nod when they've received information they consider negligible. Agriculture, he said. The word landed flat, like a door closing quietly. That's right, I said. Tough business, he said. Weather, margins, can't be easy. It was the kind of thing people say when they mean to be charitable, but have revealed, instead, that they consider your life a lesser version of living. I said it had its challenges, same as anything. He moved on. He asked Ryan about a project at work. He asked Diane something about a renovation she was doing on their property in Canmore. He did not ask me anything else for a while. The evening wore on. The food arrived. Gordon ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than I spend on groceries in a month, which I only knew because Claire mentioned it quietly to Ryan, and Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. I noticed that. I've spent a long time noticing things. It was during the main course that it happened. Gordon was talking about the Kelowna development again. Some issue with zoning, with municipal approvals, with the particular frustrations of dealing with local governments who didn't understand the value of what he was trying to build. He was animated about it. He had a way of speaking about these things as though the obstacles were personal insults. He looked at me at one point, perhaps, because I was the only one at the table who hadn't yet offered a sympathetic noise, and he said, with the particular smile of a man explaining arithmetic to a child, "It's a different world, Walter. Development at this scale. I don't expect everyone to understand how it works." Claire went very still beside Ryan. Diane looked at her plate. Ryan looked at me. I took a sip of my water. I set the glass down carefully. I looked at Gordon Ashford across the table, and I said, "I imagine it is." And I let it go. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't learned it yet, the letting go. Because it wasn't weakness, and it wasn't fear, and it wasn't because I had nothing to say. I had plenty to say. I could have told him things right there at that table that would have changed the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. But I looked at my daughter's face, at how carefully she was holding herself together, at how much this evening meant to her, and I decided that the most important thing I could do in that moment was not to win. The most important thing was to not make it worse for her. So I let Gordon Ashford believe whatever he believed about me. After dinner, out on the sidewalk, while the others were saying goodbye, Gordon shook my hand again and said it was good to meet me, with the relaxed warmth of a man who feels he has successfully managed an evening. "Come up to Calgary sometime," he said. "I'll show you around." "I'd like that," I said. I drove back to Nanton that night with the windows down, the September air coming in cold off the fields. I thought about Margaret, the way I often do on drives like that. She would have found Gordon Ashford exhausting and also, if I'm being truthful, mildly amusing. She had a gift for seeing through people without disliking them for what she saw. I've never been quite as gracious as she was, but I've been trying for 22 years since she passed, and I think I'm getting somewhere. I didn't think much more about Gordon after that. I had things to attend to. What I haven't told you yet, what Gordon Ashford didn't know and made no effort to find out, is that my farm outside Nanton is not simply a farm. It started as one. My grandfather broke that land in 1931. My father expanded it. I took it over in 1989 when I was 26 years old, with a mortgage that kept me awake more nights than I could count and a determination that had more to do with stubbornness than wisdom. I farmed it the way my father taught me, and then I started buying adjacent parcels when prices were low, drought years. When neighbors had to sell and nobody else wanted dry southern Alberta land at any price, I wanted it. Because I had learned, watching my father, that land has a long memory, and patient men are eventually rewarded. Over 30-odd years, I assembled something. I won't give you the full accounting of it because I was raised not to, but the short version is that what I hold now is approximately 23,000 acres across 3 counties in southern Alberta, some of it cropped, some of it ranched, some of it leased for mineral rights that turned out to be more interesting than anyone expected in 2006. I have a small holding company incorporated in 1998, DHD Land Holdings, after my grandfather Douglas Harold Drummond, that manages the various properties and leases and a handful of strategic investments I've made over the years, mostly in agricultural infrastructure and rural Alberta real estate, the kind of real estate nobody in Calgary pays attention to until suddenly they do. I don't talk about this generally. It isn't how I was raised, and it isn't who I am. I drive a 2019 Ram 1500 because it does the job. I wear the same boots I've worn for 6 years because they're broken in the way I like. I eat breakfast at the same diner in Nanton 3 mornings a week, and I know every person who works there by name. This is my life, and I am attached to it in a way I could not explain to a man like Gordon Ashford even if I wanted to. The wedding planning moved forward through that fall and into the following spring. I spoke to Ryan often. He started calling me on Sundays, which I liked. Claire was busy and happy. Diane and I traded emails about logistics, and once had a long phone call about the rehearsal dinner arrangements that ended up lasting 2 hours, because she started telling me about her garden, and I told her about mine, and we discovered a shared obsession with heirloom tomatoes that I did not see coming. Gordon and I did not speak much. When we were in the same room, he was pleasant in the way he'd been at the restaurant, cordial, a little distracted, always with somewhere else to be in his mind. In late January, about 9 months before the wedding, something shifted. A man named Paul Kettridge called my cell phone. Paul runs municipal relations for a mid-sized developer out of Red Deer, and we've known each other for 15 years, mostly through the Alberta Land Trust and some shared work on conservation easements in the foothills. He told me he'd heard something interesting. He told me that Gordon Ashford's firm, Ashford Commercial Properties, had submitted a proposal to the municipal district of Willow Creek for a large mixed-use development on 400 acres of land east of Nanton. Commercial, light, industrial, some residential. Significant. The kind of project that, if it moved forward, would represent the largest single development in that MD in 20 years. Paul thought I should know because one of the parcels the proposal depended on, not the main parcel, but a corridor piece, a 60-acre strip that Gordon apparently assumed was Crown land or MD land, was in fact mine. Had been mine since 2003. A quiet acquisition. Nothing on it particularly remarkable, just a dry coulee and some scrub pasture. But it sat in the middle of the access corridor that the entire development proposal depended on. Without it, the traffic flow plan didn't work. The engineering didn't work. The whole thing didn't work. I thanked Paul. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a while. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because it's important. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel satisfied, in the way that stories like this sometimes imply. Mostly I felt tired. Tired in the particular way you feel when you realize that a situation has handed you a choice you didn't ask for, and that whatever you choose will have consequences you can't fully see. I called my solicitor, a woman named Barbara Holt in Lethbridge, who has handled my land matters for 18 years, and who has the useful quality of being completely unimpressed by anything. I told her about the Ashford proposal and the parcel in question. She pulled the records, confirmed what Paul had told me, and asked me what I wanted to do. Nothing yet, I said. Let it sit for a while. They'll need to do title searches eventually, she said. When they do, they'll find you. I know, I said. Could be awkward. Could be, I said. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't tell Ryan. This was business, and I've always believed in keeping business and family separate until you absolutely can't. Spring came. The wedding preparations continued. There was a venue visit that Claire roped me into in April, a beautiful property out in the foothills, a historic ranch that had been converted for events. The kind of place Margaret would have loved immediately. I walked around with Claire and the venue coordinator and thought about my daughter in a white dress in that meadow, with the mountains behind her, and felt a feeling I have no precise word for, something compound and overwhelming, love and loss and gratitude all arriving at the same time. On the drive back to Nanton, Claire asked me, carefully, how things were going with Gordon. Fine, I said. He can be. She trailed off. A lot, I said. She laughed. Yes. A pause. He doesn't mean to be dismissive. I think he's never had to think about how he comes across. Some people don't, I said. She looked at me. Does it bother you? I thought about that honestly. No, I said. It doesn't. That was true. What Gordon Ashford thought of me had, in the end, no bearing on anything that actually mattered. My land was my land. My work was my work. My daughter knew who I was. Margaret had known who I was. What more does a man actually need? June came. And with June came a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Drummond? A man's voice. Professional. Careful. My name is Evan Park. I'm the development director for Ashford Commercial Properties. I was hoping to speak with you about a land matter. Of course, I said. He explained the development proposal in broad terms. He mentioned the parcel. He was very measured, very professional. He said they had recently completed title searches and had discovered that the access corridor parcel was registered to DHD Land Holdings, which their legal team had traced to me. That's correct, I said. A brief pause. We were, frankly, surprised, he said. I imagine you were. Another pause. Mr. Ashford would like to speak with you personally, if that would be acceptable. Of course, I said. Have him call me. Gordon called the next morning. There was a quality to his voice I hadn't heard before, not quite discomfort, but something adjacent to it. A careful neutrality that cost him something. He said it was good to hear from me. He said he hoped the family was well. He made a brief attempt at small talk, which I allowed, and then he told me about the development project and explained the situation with the parcel. I know the parcel, I said. You've held it for some time, apparently. Since 2003, I said. I bought it off an estate. No one else wanted it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I have to be honest with you, Walter. This project represents a significant investment for us. We have municipal approval in principle. We have investors committed. We have a general contractor on standby. The access corridor is critical. Without it, the project, as designed, doesn't proceed. I understand, I said. I'd like to meet and discuss whether there's a path forward. I agreed to meet. I called Barbara before I did anything else. She pulled the comps, looked at what that corridor meant to the overall development value, and gave me a number she called conservative. It was not a small number. We met in Calgary, in a boardroom at Ashford Commercial Properties. Gordon was there with his development director and their legal counsel. I brought Barbara. I wore the same clothes I always wear. I drove up in my Ram. Gordon greeted me warmly, more warmly than he ever had before, which I noticed without remarking on. He offered coffee. He sat across the table from me with an expression that was genuinely difficult to read, something between respect and a discomfort he was working hard to manage. The meeting was professional throughout. There was no confrontation. I did not say a single word to remind him of the restaurant, of a different world, of anything he'd said or implied that evening in September. That wasn't why I was there. We negotiated over 3 sessions across 2 weeks. Barbara was excellent. In the end, we reached an agreement. I would grant a permanent access easement over the parcel, with certain conservation conditions I cared about regarding the coulee drainage and native grass corridor. The compensation was fair. The conditions were respected. At the close of the final meeting, after the documents were initialed and the lawyers were packing their bags, Gordon asked his team to give us a moment. They filed out. It was just the 2 of us in the boardroom, late afternoon light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Calgary spread out below us. He looked at me for a long moment. I owe you an apology, he said. From dinner last September. I waited. I made assumptions, he said. I was dismissive. I didn't. He paused, working through something. I didn't ask. I didn't ask who you were, or what you'd built, or what you knew. I just decided. And that was wrong. I thought about Margaret, about her hands holding mine at the dinner table, about what she would say right now, in this room. We all do it, I said. More than we know. He nodded slowly. I'll try to do less of it. That's all any of us can do, I said. We shook hands. A different handshake than the one at the restaurant, slower, more considered, something genuine in it. I drove home to Nanton in the early evening, the foothills catching the last light on my left, the flat prairie opening up ahead of me. I stopped at the diner in town. It was just past closing, but Ruth Ann was still there, wiping tables, and she let me in for a coffee the way she always does. I sat at the counter and didn't talk much, just let the coffee warm my hands. The wedding was in October, as planned. Claire was incandescent that day. There is no other word for it. She came down the aisle toward Ryan, and I watched his face change when he saw her, watched all the composure he'd assembled for the occasion simply leave him, and I thought, yes, that's right. That's what it should look like. I danced with her twice, once at the formal first dance, and once later in the evening when a song came on that she and Margaret used to listen to together in the kitchen when Claire was small. Claire didn't say anything when the song started. She just found me across the room and walked over and took my hand. Gordon and I were seated at adjacent tables during the dinner portion of the evening. He was different, not unrecognizable, still himself, still big in a room, but something had shifted. He talked to the people around him with more attention. He listened more. When he spoke to the older gentleman on his left, a retired school principal from Pincher Creek who had taught Ryan in grade 7, I watched Gordon actually lean in, actually ask questions. People can change. I've seen it. It usually comes from something that costs them a loss, a humiliation, a moment when the story they've been telling themselves about who they are meets a fact that doesn't fit. It doesn't always take, but sometimes it does. At the end of the evening, after the cake and the speeches and the first round of guests beginning to say their goodbyes, Gordon found me near the bar. He had a whiskey in his hand and a look on his face that was, I think, as close to humble as he'd ever been. "I want you to know," he said, "that Ryan is a lucky man, not because of the land or the business, because of who raised him to love a woman like Claire." I looked at him. "Thank you," I said. We stood together for a moment in the warmth of the room, the music low, the candles burning down, our children dancing together 20 feet away, and I felt something I can only describe as peace, not victory, not vindication, but simply peace. The kind you can only feel when you've held on to your own dignity long enough that it becomes permanent. Here is what I know, now, at 63, that I didn't fully understand at 30. The man who has nothing to prove is the most powerful person in any room. Not because he is without wounds, we all carry wounds, but because he has stopped letting those wounds make decisions for him. He can sit across from condescension and choose not to respond to it, not because he is weak, but because he is strong enough to know that some arguments aren't worth having, some battles aren't worth winning, and some people need to discover their own errors in their own time. I think about my grandfather breaking that land in 1931. I think about my father working it in the lean years. I think about my own hands, rough and scarred, in those fields for 3 decades. None of them were trying to impress anyone. They were trying to build something that would last. And the measure of whether they succeeded is not in what any particular man thought of them on a September evening over a leather wine menu. The measure is in the land, still there, in the daughter who danced with me in the candlelight, in the young man who looked at her like she was the best thing in the world. That is the inheritance that matters. Not the acres, not the easement, not the number Barbara called conservative. The inheritance that matters is what you show the people watching you, how you carry yourself when someone tries to make you small, whether you stay true to what you know yourself to be, whether you choose the harder dignity over the easier retaliation. My father told me once, driving the tractor at dusk when I was about 12 years old, "Walter, the land doesn't care what you think of yourself. It only responds to what you do." He was talking about farming. He was talking about everything. Don't let anyone else's blindness become your burden. Do your work, know your worth, and when the moment comes, and it will come, sooner or later, for all of us, let the truth speak for itself. It always does. It just takes time.